สวัสดีครับ I'm Point from ค้นพบ I want to continue from our previous few videos and today talk about stress management and present to you a really powerful yet simple technique for managing stress and for changing unhelpful thoughts, which is often the cause of stress, into more empowering thoughts and more helpful ones. Now, this dream technique is one which Rob Kelly came up with, and I found it really useful, so I want to talk about today. But before we talk about that, let's dive in real quick into the basics of stress, what stress really is, how it's produced. Right? So, for example, you probably have heard many people use similar phrases such as, work is really stressful at the moment. Perhaps you yourself describe this situation for yourself quite often. Right? So people often use phrases like work is really stressful at the moment. But if you look at this from a technical perspective, then we will actually realize that the work itself isn't stressful, right? Neither is flying, for example. Neither is going to the dentist. Neither is having an argument. Neither is driving during rush hour, having a deadline at work, running late for a meeting, a large bill to pay, an interview to go to, or any other experience which we believe to be stressful. What this shows is that actually stress does not happen to us. Rather, stress is what we create when we don't manage our thinking very well. This is the first key insight to take note of, right? We produce and create our own stress through our unhelpful thinking and our unhelpful thoughts. Our thoughts produce our negative emotions and stressful emotions, right? From another perspective to look at this would be to say that, in other words, our sense of self, right? Our sense of well-being is so identified and so associated with any thought patterns that come up. And we follow along the chain of these thoughts and these thinking patterns, which are often unhelpful, and we believe it to be real. And that leads to a stress response, right? So, in other words, whether or not you experience excessive stress, a lot of stress, really depends upon how you interpret an event or experience. The second key point here is interpretation. It all has to do with your interpretation on an event or experience that happens to you. In other words, it's all about your perspective or your outlook on it in relation to your sense of self. And how do we interpret things? We interpret things from our thinking styles, from the thoughts that come up, from the mental narrative in our mind that, again, we often identify with, and we get lost in that chain of thoughts, and we believe it to be real, a real threat, and we have an emotional response, emotional arousal that leads to stress, right? So if you interpret an event or circumstance or experience as being somehow, in one way, shape, or form, challenging, threatening, aversive, or dangerous, then this will lead you to feel an emotional arousal and therefore respond by feeling stressed out. For example, let's use the example of being stuck in a traffic jam and running late for work. How a person in this situation responds in relation to their thinking and their interpretation about the circumstance or the event that they're caught up in will determine whether or not they're going to be stressed, right? So let's say response number one. That person stays calm, stays relaxed, and thinks to himself or herself, well, never mind. I'll give a call to the office and let them know that I'll be running late today, I'll be delayed a little bit, and that I can always work a bit later this evening to compensate for it if the traffic doesn't clear up soon. So this person in this first example responds by managing their thinking very well. Therefore, stress is prevented. He or she feels in control of the situation. He or she feels that they have the coping skills to deal with the traffic jam and the consequences that this will cause, say being late at work. Now, if we take a different response, say response number two, Say if the same person instead responds by thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna be late for work. I'm really busy at the moment. There are so many things to do at the office at the moment. I'm already feeling overwhelmed and I'm gonna be late today again. What if the boss gets angry and I get fired? All because I'm stuck here in traffic for hours. You can obviously see that this line of thinking represents poor management of that person's thinking styles. Obviously, this is going to lead to high amounts of stress. So there you go. Stress is the result of our thinking and our interpretation. It isn't the traffic jam per se that causes the stress. We just tend to mistakenly attribute the external circumstance or the external event as the cause of our bad stressful experience, when in fact, in reality, it's always in our head. It's always been in your mind. Our thinking is what produces the stress. So therefore, those who interpreted their situation as being more distressing, independent of the actual disruption and material loss, independent of the real situation, independent of the reality, those who interpret this in a more distressing way will therefore suffer more stress-related symptoms. So if we look at this in a diagram, for example, we can visualize it as follows. You have a event or circumstance which is about to produce stress. We can call that a stressor, right? Then a person has an interpretation in relation to that event. Let's say that interpretation is negative. That person interprets the event or circumstance negatively, right? This leads to a stress response. Now this person is at a fork in the road. Whether or not he or she is going to be very stressed out depends on how he or she feels in relation to the event, how he or she interprets the circumstance, and how he or she manages their thinking. So in example number 1, let's say the person feels powerless in relation to the event that's happened to them. They feel powerless and they don't believe that they have an ability to cope with the situation, right? This line of thinking is very unhelpful, it's very negative, it's very disempowering. Obviously, they feel that the event is bigger than they are, it's beyond their control, they cannot cope with it. Obviously, this will lead to stress-related symptoms. And if prolonged enough, it can even lead to illness, right? Because if stress is prolonged for long periods of time, it will compromise the immune system temporarily and can lead to illness. On the other hand, if the person manages his or her thinking well, then rather quickly, right, they will realize that there's not much to worry about because they believe in their ability and their skill to cope with the situation and the event and the circumstance, no matter how unfavorable it may be. And if you believe that you can cope with the situation and cope with the loss should there be consequences, then why would you need to worry? That person returns to a normal state of mind, does not feel stress, and recovery happens. That person recovers to a normal, not stressed out state of mind, right? Obviously, there are real effects of stress on your health. Number 1, the effects of stress on your thinking capabilities is this. You will feel more confused and you will find that you have difficulty in making decisions. Yeah, your concentration becomes poorer. You have a poorer concentration, and you have problems with your memory and your ability to recall events, and you probably have anxiety. This is the effects of stress on your thinking. As for your emotions, you feel overwhelmed, you feel agitated, shocked, perhaps even angry, upset, or even depression and grief. Of course, we've probably all been there, and we can probably all relate to this. Stress has effects on your physical body. You sweat, you feel dizzy, you have an increased heart rate, you have higher blood pressure, right? You have rapid breathing, you have changes in your immune system, right? And this leads to behavioral changes as well. So you have changes in normal behavior. For example, your eating habits change. You might have a loss in your appetite. You might have changes in your sleeping pattern. You might find it difficult to sleep. You have insomnia, difficulty sleeping. You may have poor personal hygiene because being stressed out, you don't take good care of yourself, right? And you have a withdrawal from other people and therefore prolonged periods of silence, right? So obviously there is a way to manage stress, which we'll get into very shortly. But before we get into that, obviously it's understandable that it can be difficult to escape from a highly stressed state of mind. Because when we're really stressed out, in that moment of time, all of our unhelpful thinking styles, they become exaggerated, they become heightened, they become magnified, which only further serves to contribute to the problem. So it's obviously very understandable how when we get stuck in this situation, managing and reducing your stress level at this point therefore becomes much more tricky. Because all your negative thinking styles are firing up. Your catastrophic thinking, obsessive thinking, perfectionist thinking, black and white thinking, learned helplessness, to name a few. They take over and they make you lose perspective on the problem completely. You feel overwhelmed, right? In other words, one thing I want to add to this is, I guess you can look at it as the sense of immediate urgency and the sense of danger or peril, right? It results from your sense of self being completely identified with your mind's unhelpful thought patterns, irregardless of the actuality of the situation, irregardless of the reality of the circumstances, right? We feel that because we're identified, we are associated with the thoughts and the mental narrative that goes on in our mind. We feel that that event or that challenge is bigger than we are and that we're not able to handle it or deal with it effectively. Obviously, this leads to stress, right? Which is why it is important to maintain perspective. Because if you look at this line of thinking, we can see that stress happens the moment where we begin to lose perspective on the problem, right? So it's important to maintain perspective. We can therefore also see that stress is a result of an unhelpful interpretation about the experience that happens to us. Here's an interesting thought experiment. Everybody experiences everything in different ways. That's actually really profound to realize. And I've given this example before and I'll give it again. Think about two people in the exact same room, right? They're literally in the same room, in the same space, but yet they can have completely different experiences in that room. For example, person number one can feel that, say, the room that I'm sitting in filming this video right now, they perhaps feel that it's a nice, lovely, beautiful room, a nice cozy room, a nice, cool and comfortable room when the air conditioning is turned on. And they have a positive experience. They feel good being in this room. Person number two can feel that this room is messy, this room is small, it's ugly, the air conditioning machine is not working well, so it's too warm. He or she has a negative experience in the room, feels pretty shitty in the room, right? So this shows that an individual's experience, right, has to do with the way in which they interpret the circumstances around them, the events that happen to them. Again, it goes back to the previous videos that we talked about. It has to do with the spectacles or the lens through which they look at and perceive and make understanding of the world. It's about their belief systems, how they interpret their surrounding environment, their circumstances, the events that happen to them. Right? Therefore, it's important to maintain perspective. Because when you maintain perspective, when you have perspective on things, you have a complete and unobstructive view, a complete and clear understanding of the situation. You have clarity. You see the full picture and understand all the different factors involved. Therefore, you are able to remain calm and make informed opinions and decisions, and you know what your options are. You feel that you are in control and that you are capable of handling and solving the situation, no matter how difficult the challenge may seem. However, when you do not have perspective, you are unable to have any objectivity over your sense of your symptoms, say over your personal relationships, over your progress at work, over your current situation, about your finances or your health or anything for that matter, right? So then the next question is, how do we gain perspective? And when we talk about this, this sets us up to talk about the dream technique, which we'll get into quite shortly. To gain perspective, we must take a step back. Take a look at your belief systems in relation to your problem that you believe you have, right? The key is to analyze and break down these belief systems, break down how you are interpreting and perceiving this quote-unquote problem that you're having, so that you see all the component parts, say the distorted thinking, the sense of powerlessness, the unhelpful thinking styles, the fears that are involved, right, etc. It is therefore, getting perspective is therefore about getting to see it from a different angle, a different viewpoint. It's therefore about gaining power, because when you see things from a different perspective, from a different angle, you actually shift your sense of power and control over your experiences to be more internal. You look at the dilemma from all possible angles and you realize that there are many more options on the table than you originally thought. And if you realize that, then you feel more empowered in relation to the problem. You feel more trust and more belief in your coping skills. Again, this has to do with building strong psychological foundations, strong internal foundations. So if you feel that you are capable of handling the situation, then this helps you to deal with it much more effectively. Therefore, you don't need to be stressed about it. And this has to do with how you interpret it, how you maintain perspective. It has to do with your thinking in relation to the situation, in relation to the event or circumstance. The key, therefore, lies in getting perspective as early as possible before you begin to worry about it, before you begin to think in a catastrophic manner, before you begin to think in a black and white matter, before you begin to think in a learned helplessness or a negative way, right? So again, we now see that to manage stress effectively, we must maintain perspective. And that lies in about how we manage our thinking. So let's talk about the dream technique that Rob Kelly came up with. Rob Kelly, the founder of the Thrive program and the author of this Thrive book, which we have been reviewing throughout the past videos, he presented this very powerful and this very simple 5-step process, which is very useful for stress management and for building our coping skills, for working on our psychological foundations to build a stronger and a more internal psychological foundations. Now, I want you to think of this as a game that you can play throughout the entire day. DREAM stands for detect, reward, escape, amend, and magnify. So briefly, real quick, first of all, we want to detect that we are having an unhelpful or limiting thought or feeling. Second step, once you detect that, you want to reward yourself for being aware of that unhelpful thought or feeling, for detecting that unhelpful thought or feeling. Number 3, you want to escape from it. You want to unassociate yourself, or in other words, you want to disidentify yourself from the situation, from the thought processes that lead to the stressful feeling. So you want to escape from the situation that brought on the unhelpful thinking and unhelpful thoughts or feelings. Step number 4, you want to amend. Amend means to amend and change the thought or feeling into a more positive and empowering one. And last, step number 5, is we want to magnify. We want to magnify this new, more empowering, more helpful thought and image. We want to make it bigger. We want to make it stronger. We want to make it brighter. We want to visualize it more. So let's dive into each process. Process number 1, detect. So this is when you become aware, or you have detected that you have just created an unhelpful thought or a limiting belief, a thought or a physical experience. So for example, this is when you realize, for example, the thought that say, I'm not good enough for that job. I'm never gonna get over this illness. My life is shit. I'll never be successful in business. My relationships always end badly, right? You wanna detect these unhelpful thoughts when they happen in your mind. See, seems simple, right? And next step number 2, reward. Now, the key point is this. This is perhaps one of the most important parts of this process, but it may be the most difficult to remind yourself to do, especially if you are a person with low self-esteem, right? So here's how to look at it. You see, because thoughts are very sneaky, they often happen in ways that we're not aware of. They pop up in our mind, and before we realize it, we're identified with those thought processes. So the moment you catch yourself with an unhelpful thought, you want to give yourself a praise. You want to feel proud of yourself for catching that unhelpful thought. Pat yourself on the back, right? Because you want to process the detection of that unhelpful thought in a positive way. Be really pleased with yourself that you have taken a step in the right direction. So tell yourself, well done for catching this thought that is unhelpful and that is disempowering, and that you can stop it in its tracks, right? For me, I really like this step because I like to think of this as a game for myself that I'm playing, right? And I condition myself to feel that I just won the game the moment I catch myself thinking an unhelpful thought, right? And when I successfully remove myself from identification with it, so I will allow myself or encourage myself to feel a sense of joy or have a eureka moment because, aha, I caught that unhelpful thought. Hey, it's pretty fun to realize that going on in your mind, the mental activity. So think of it as a game, right? So the next step is escape. Now, I just want to be clear here. When Rob Kelly talks about escaping from this pattern, he doesn't mean for you to be in denial of your thoughts or your behavior. However, escaping from this situation means to interrupt the pattern of behavior, right? So that it helps a person to unassociate with a thought or impulse from another experience, right? That is, it's always easier to change how you feel when you temporarily change your situation, right? Just do anything that you can to escape from the familiar pattern that leads to that feeling or leads to that thought, even if it's just for a few seconds. Now, this is best illustrated with an example. So, for example, if you are the type of person who tends to grab the cigarette, reach out and start a smoke whenever you have coffee, so therefore, change the behavior and choose not to have coffee, right? To prevent yourself from, thinking along the lines of having a thought of a craving for a cigarette and thinking that you need a cigarette, right? The escape from the unhelpful or painful or limiting thought, it actually has the effect of letting you feel empowered and in control. Again, this is about building internal psychological foundations. It's about you feeling in control of your life. Because when you successfully escape, for example, a smoking addict who is trying to quit smoking, if he or she is successfully able to stop himself or herself from smoking the cigarette by changing the behavior, say choosing not to have coffee in the case where they tend to have cigarettes whenever they have coffee, right? The moment they are successful in executing that change of behavior, they feel more empowered because they are telling themselves that they're no longer a victim or a slave to these negative experiences anymore, because now there is something that they can do about it. They are in control of themselves. They can do something about it, right? So I want to add to this point that Rob Kelly is trying to to illustrate in step number 3 for escape, I want to add that for me, escape means removing yourself from the complete identification with the thoughts produced by your mind. How do you do this? Just try your best to observe your thoughts as they play out and observe this objectively as if you are a third person viewing your own thoughts. Observe how your thoughts produce your feelings and therefore leads to an emotional arousal, right? And try your best to not judge yourself for having any of these thoughts or these feelings. In other words, don't feel bad for having that thought. Don't feel bad for having that negative feeling. Just try your best to observe it. Because when you just observe the thought that happens or the thinking in your mind, this helps you to disidentify your sense of self from those unhelpful thoughts. This helps you to anchor yourself away from the thoughts because you're saying that the negative emotions, the negative thoughts are over there. I'm safe and secure over here just watching it. And sooner or later, you will start to learn that, thoughts and emotions are like waves. They come and they go. If you learn to just watch them and be patient with them, you will not get swept away by them. And that for me is a very powerful way to escape from unhelpful thoughts. So I just wanted to add to this third step that Rob Kelly mentioned in his dream technique that he called step number 3, escape. Right. So step number 4 is to amend. What we want to do in this step is once we catch the negative thought that happens or we realize the unhelpful thinking, right? We want to take effort to simply rephrase and amend the unhelpful or limiting suggestion, the limiting thought into a more helpful one. But the key point is you must mean what you say. You must mean it when you try to think a new, more helpful thought, a more positive thought, a more empowering thought. So let's use the help of an example. So for example, if you catch yourself with the negative thought, say, I'm never going to get that decent job, right? Try to change it to something more empowering, such as, I'm feeling more confident and I am improving my life on a daily basis. I can get that new job, right? Or for example, I don't know why my coworkers hate me. Say if you feel that way at work and you catch yourself having this thought, try to change it to, for example, I'm working on myself and my communication skills every day. I can solve my problems I can solve any problems I may have in my working relationships. But again, the key is to really mean what you say. So once you catch the unhelpful thought, try to think something more empowering to get yourself to look in a solution-oriented way. Again, similar to the last video, this is about you taking responsibility for your emotions and your thoughts. We want to realize that we can gently challenge our negative thinking and change it to more powerful, more positive ones, more active thoughts. And the last step in this 5-step process called the dream technique is to magnify. What we want to do here is we want to magnify the newly created positive suggestion, positive thought, or positive fantasy and actually begin to imagine and visualize the outcome that you want to happen. Now I get it. This might sound silly, but think about it. The only reason you feel stressed or helpless in any situation is because number 1, you identify with the unhelpful thoughts that pop up in your mind. You then proceed to unconsciously imagine and visualize and think about how horrible that experience is going to be. So in other words, we're always, imagining the outcomes that we expect in ways that we are aware of and are not aware of. For example, say you have a thought or a mental narrative that happens in your mind about how your boss is going to yell at you because you are going to give a bad presentation, right? You begin to worry about this and you begin to imagine how embarrassing you would feel to get yelled at by your boss standing up there giving a presentation in front of the entire meeting room, right? So with this in mind, because we're always imagining anyways, in both ways that we are aware of and are not aware of, then why not shift a negative visualization or the thinking or the imagination of a negative outcome and shift it into a more positive one. Imagine and visualize a more positive outcome that you want. So therefore, to magnify means to try to live in the imagined outcome that you want. You want to focus on the feelings, focus on the sensations, and focus on the emotions as strongly as you can. Focus on how you think you would feel, the emotions you think you would have if you were to attain the desired outcome. The more powerful you can do this practice, the more powerful the result is going to be. But again, for this to work, you must mean what you say and believe what you imagine and visualize. Because similar to what I said in the previous video, if you don't really mean what you say, it's going to be an empty positive statement. If you don't truly believe what you imagine and what you magnify and what you visualize, then you're going to feel disheartened really quickly. It's going to backfire. And then when it doesn't work, you're going to feel disheartened, you're going to feel negative, and you're going to start to think negatively again. So it will backfire. So mean what you say and believe what you imagine. The point of the dream technique is, again, we want to build strong psychological foundations. We want to build strong internal foundations. We want to shift our thinking and manage our thoughts so that they serve to help us build a stronger, more internal sense of power and control over our experiences. We want to promote the belief in yourself that you have the coping skills, that you have the resources and the capabilities to respond to and to cope with any situation that you may be stuck in, no matter how unfavorable it may seem. Because after all, if you manage your thinking in such a way that you believe that you can handle it, that you can cope with it, then why would you need to worry and produce stress, correct? With this in mind, stress is once again produced from the way you interpret an event or experience, produced by the way you perceive the situation, what you think about it. So we want to learn how to manage this better, which is why I found the dream technique to be really powerful and really practical. Again, to summarize the dream technique: detect, reward, escape, amend, magnify. Detect that you are having an unhelpful or limiting thought or feeling. Reward yourself for detecting and being aware of that unhelpful thought or feeling. Escape from the situation that brought on that unhelpful thought or feeling. Then amend the thought or feeling to create a positive and empowering one. Then try to magnify this new thought and image. Visualize it. Make it bigger, make it stronger, make it brighter. So that's the dream technique that Rob Kelly came up with, and I want to share it in today's video because I think this is a really practical, easy to follow 5-step process to manage your stress better, to manage your thinking better. I found that it's worked for me, and I want to share today. And again, as I always emphasize in many of my videos, do have patience with this practice, because what we're really doing is we're learning a new habit, we're learning a new skill set, so it will take time to see results. But I guarantee you that once you see the results, you'll find that it's really rewarding, especially when you have that aha moment, when you catch that unhelpful thought and when you succeed in amending it and changing it into a positive one, and you begin to feel more empowered, you begin to feel more in control of yourself. And once you feel more capable in your coping skills, more capable and more resourceful, you'll want to work on this practice more and more and work on it harder. And that's where the fun really begins, and that's where this really starts to pay off, and that's where the fruits lie. So I hope this video was valuable for you. Please leave in the comments what you think, what you thought was particularly helpful in this video. Share with me your comments on how you deal with your own stress and how you manage your thinking. If you like the video, please leave a like for me. Please share the video for me. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube, and hit the bell button for future videos. Or if you're watching this on Facebook, please like my Facebook page for future videos. That's it for now. Good luck to your practice. I'll see you next time. สวัสดีครับ